Hello, BookTube. I'm Jonathan, and I like to bring you guys the latest and greatest sci-fi book recommendations. So that's why I have found a list from Check's Notes 1998. Yes, that's right. In 1998, Locus Magazine polled its readers on what were the greatest science fiction books of all time that were published before the year 1990. So I thought this would be an interesting list to look at to see whether over the last quarter century or so, maybe some of these books have fallen out of favor and are maybe worth a second look. Some modern readers might be missing out on them, and maybe the opposite. Some books that weren't classics quite yet in 1998 have kind of found some fandom over time. So there are 53 books on this list. I've read 40 of them, and I'm going to let you know which books I think might suit which kinds of sci-fi readers. And of the ones that I haven't read, I've read something, a different book, by all but two of those authors. So the few that I haven't read, you guys can let me know how high I need to prioritize those on my TBR. So let's get into the list, starting with number one, Dune. Dune's always number one. It's Dune, of course. It's the golden boy, the golden child of science fiction, Dune. And Dune, the world building, the themes, the writing, it's also rich. The plot and the characters, I'm not quite as high on as some people, but I am a big fan of Dune. I'm actually reading the series right now. Don't know if you can see up on the bookshelf. Chapter House Dune, book number 6 in the series. I'm going to be reading next month. So if you guys like Dune, stick around for some Dune content in the next couple of weeks. I'll be talking about the sequels, the controversial, polarizing sequels. All right, moving on to number 2, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert A. Heinlein. So I've only read one Heinlein book, and that was Starship Troopers. I read that quite recently. And as you'll see, this list, Locus readers, they're quite the fan of Heinlein. So we'll get into him and Starship Troopers a little bit more later on. Haven't read that one or Stranger in a Strange Land. Number 3, The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. So I've read this, and I can see why it was revolutionary at the time. It was interesting in the way the way it dealt with some social themes and aliens, but it didn't blow my socks off. However, I am interested in reading more Le Guin. The Lathe of Heaven, I own. The Dispossessed, I want to read as well, so we'll see how they compare for me. Number 4, The Foundation Trilogy by Isaac Asimov. Kind of cheating a little bit, combining all 3 of the Foundation books together, but I'm a big fan of the first one. Not quite as high on as some people on books 2 and 3, but very influential. Definitely, its presence has been felt throughout history, the history of the science fiction genre. Stranger in a Strange Land, as I mentioned, at number 5. And then The Stars, My Destination, number 6 by Alfred Bester. So I really enjoyed this one. It kind of combines some elements of space opera. It's kind of proto-cyberpunk in a way. It's a great revenge story. Alfred Bester, very creative. I've read 2 books by him, this and The Demolished Man, and I like this one more. So I think this one is a deserved classic. Number 7, A Canticle for Leibowitz by Walter M. Miller Jr. So this is dystopian, post-apocalyptic, very philosophical, delves into some religious themes, and it's split into 3 parts, and I really liked part 1. I thought it had some interesting discussions. It was kind of funny at times. It isn't quite as dramatic and dark as some dystopian books can be. And then part 2 I found a little bit boring, and then part 3, a certain character kind of gets on their soapbox about a particular issue, and the book sort of failed to hold my interest somewhat. So I know this is it's pretty high on some people's list. It's pretty high on Lucas's list. I'm glad I read it, but it wouldn't be this high on my list. But getting to one that would be number 8, Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke. I do have the folio edition over here. Clarke, one of my favorite writers, and Childhood's End, my favorite Clarke book. And I think a good one to start with because it's not quite as hard sci-fi as some of his other books. It's got another book split into 3 parts, interestingly, back to back with Canticle. And I thought each part was just more mind-blowing than the one before it. I love the ending. Just it encapsulates everything that I love about sci-fi. Those big ideas that impact you in a personal way. All right, moving on to our next row. We'll see how smoothly, nope, not that smoothly, we can operate the tab while in the stream. Okay, Moving on to number 9, we have Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, another book that I really enjoy. One that I think is good for getting into sci-fi if you're a younger reader. There's some great tactical training at the battle school, which our young potential future leaders engage in. But there's also some interesting philosophy. I think the character development is really interesting, and I think this is a book that works well on multiple levels. So definitely deserves a top 10 spot. Speaking of top 10, we have Hyperion by Dan Simmons at number 10. And I famously or infamously hold the controversial opinion that The Fall of Hyperion I enjoyed even more than Hyperion, but I love the Hyperion Cantos, so I'm glad to see it there. We have the stories of our different pilgrims traveling to Hyperion to visit the time tombs, which are moving backwards in time and are guarded by that pointy, freaky Shrike-looking guy. And I don't know if that's my favorite cover. I like the original cover. Some people tell me it looks like a bad fantasy novel cover, but I love it. I think it's great. Let me know what you think of the Hyperion cover in the comments. Moving on, at number 11, we have Gateway by Frederick Pohl. So this is another book that focuses a little bit more on, it's kind of new wave. So it kind of focuses on a character's history, their psychology, their motivations, the past affecting their future. He discusses things with an artificially intelligent therapist, which is kind of interesting. And then we also have the mystery of the Hichi, an alien species, which have left little but a few artifacts for humans to try and learn about them from. You know, what happened to them? Where did they go? Can we use this technology in any way, an interesting way? You'll have to read the book and find out. I liked it, but didn't love it. Number 12, The Forever War by Joe Haldeman, a classic in the military sci-fi subgenre. Joe Haldeman was actually in the Vietnam War as a soldier and used his experiences as a reference to create this story in the Forever War. And there's really some cool technology, some cool sci-fi concepts, cool character development in there as well. So one of my favorite military sci-fi books, The Forever War. A little bit of a surprise here at number 13, one of my favorite books that I don't think gets talked about enough, More Than Human by Theodore Sturgeon. Makes me very happy to see it here. Another book split in 3 parts. I guess that was a bit of a popular structure for classic sci-fi now that I think about it. And the parts kind of feel disconnected as they tell the stories of these characters, some of which have disabilities, but some of which them also have supernatural abilities. And it's this story about sort of the way that people and species are interconnected, and it's on the softer end of the sci-fi spectrum, but I found it very poetic, very powerful. Absolutely love this book. All right, number 14, Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny, another one that I have read, and this one kind of helps, is a great example of that great Arthur C. Clarke quote about sufficiently advanced technology being indistinguishable, we got there in the end, from magic. Because this book kind of reads almost like fantasy. It feels kind of magical. And it's a little bit hard to grasp what exactly is going on. But the story unravels in a kind of interesting way. I don't think I ever connected with it on the personal level that a lot of people seem to, but it's a unique book. It's worth a try if you like something in that kind of style of science fiction. Number 15, Neuromancer, the book that arguably defines the cyberpunk subgenre, one that often gets recommended to new sci-fi readers that I think is a little bit hard to get into. When I read this book, I found it a little bit confusing. I was like, what is going on here? There's no hand-holding from Gibson, a lot of terminology, and it was really only after reading up on the book, after I had finished it, that I started to appreciate it on the deeper level that I think that book deserves. Number 16, Startide Rising by David Brin. So this is book two in the, I'm forgetting the name of it, series. A lot of people say you can skip book 1, which is what I did. Startide Rising, I think, holds up on its own, kind of as a standalone, but maybe I should have read book 1 because I kind of struggled to get into this one a little bit. It's a space opera. There's some really cool ideas to do with uplifting. I won't spoil what that is. There's also a lot of dolphin poetry, though, dolphin songs. There's just a lot going on where I felt like the book was a little bit messy. There were some things that I wished it focused on more, and it didn't all hit for me, but hey, if you like poetry, you like songs in your book, in your space opera, give Startide Rising a try. All right. Moving on. Look at this. Look how good we are at getting it scrolling, guys. This is elite. A mastery of technological display. What words? Both technology and words are failing me now. Moving on to number 17, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. So I have read this one. I love time travel stories. This is not the first ever time travel story, but the first ever novel to use a machine as the device from which the time travel takes place in the story. The Time Machine is where we get the expression from. So it's very creative. It was ahead of its time, 1895. Some cool ideas, but I don't think it's going to blow away modern readers. I read it, I had a good time, I'm glad I read it, but there's some more complex, more interesting, thought-provoking, stimulating time travel stories out there, but worth a read for the sci-fi history. Number 18, The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick. I've read 6 PKD books now. I really enjoyed 5 of them. The Man in the High Castle is the 6th one. I didn't hate it. It has a fantastic premise. What if the Axis forces had won World War II? How would things be different, a couple decades from then? But the story kind of meanders, and it was not really what I expected it or wanted it to be. It might be something that I enjoy more on a reread, but I just don't think it quite delivered on that interesting premise. Number 19, The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin. Mentioned that before. I haven't read that one yet, but I will be reading The Lathe of Heaven and that one probably relatively soon. And then rounding out the top 20, we have Stand on Zanzibar by John Brunner. I have read a book by John Brunner, and that was The Shockwave Rider. And I was mixed on it. Another sort of proto-cyberpunk book. It had some interesting ideas, but I don't know, it felt a little thin in parts. I struggled to connect to it, didn't really care about any of the characters. Stand on Zanzibar is a lot longer, a lot more ambitious, something that I do want to get to just because I think it's how highly regarded it is within the sci-fi, but because I didn't love Shockwave Rider, this probably isn't at the top of my TBR priority at the moment. Number 21, 1984. So this is my personal favorite of the classic dystopian novels, although I think they're all great, the ones I'm talking about. But 1984, I think it's incredible world building, thematically important, and of the classic dystopian novels, this is the one where I connected the most to the story and the characters and the ending. What a gut punch! A punch to the gut doesn't do it. That doesn't describe it sufficiently. It's more like a sledgehammer to the soul. Oh my goodness, what an ending. Number 22, The Demolished Man. I mentioned that I had read this one. I enjoyed it. There's some interesting ideas, but as a kind of detective story, it just wasn't really all that interesting as a detective story. I like some of the things going on around it, but the actual sort of meat of it, didn't really fill me up sci-fi wise. And the main detective was so lame. Like if you write a detective story, give me a cool detective. All right, he sucked. I can't even remember his name, but I didn't like him. Anyway, number 23, The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. So ahead of Fahrenheit 451, which is slightly interesting. It is more sci-fi. It's more science fiction-y than Fahrenheit 451. So maybe that's why the readers of Locus went for this one. I like them a similar amount. I probably lean towards 451. But The Martian Chronicles is great. A stitch-up novel, bunch of stories of humans traveling to and colonizing Mars, and a lot of different interesting things happen, and then Bradbury weaves them together in a clever way. And it's Bradbury, so the prose is incredible as always. Then, number 24, as I mentioned, I just recently read Starship Troopers, and the book cover says it's controversial. Is it as controversial as the book cover claimed it to be? Well, yes and no. I think as a military sci-fi book, it works quite well. I particularly enjoyed the training parts of it, going through boot camp, the atmosphere, the progression. Felt very, very real, like a fully realized world, and I liked that journey. I think the actual action in it was just kind of fine, but this book is really a philosophical book, and I think those elements were a little bit hit and miss for me. I don't know if the book is preachy, but there's definitely a preachy character in it, and I liked how the thought experiments were thought-provoking. This book did make me think, and I think that's a good thing. although I didn't necessarily always agree with the conclusions that that preachy character came to. Just to give you one small example, this teacher, and this is not spoilery, this teacher says that juvenile delinquents became juvenile delinquents because they weren't spanked enough as children. And so, firstly, I'm sure there's kids that were not spanked that grew up to be law-abiding citizens, and I think there were probably kids that were spanked a lot that still ended up becoming criminals. So I didn't find that to be an overly nuanced argument. He also says that this is why you need to spank your kids and your dogs if you want them to do what you want them to do. I'm sorry, but have you seen my dog? Have you seen how cute Charlie is? Okay, if she's being cheeky, I might have to tell her, nope, I'm not going to smack Charlie. Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Heinlein. I'm not on board with that part of it. But that was the character, not Heinlein. Heinlein himself. I enjoyed this book enough to be willing to read more Heinlein in the future. Yes, enough for that to be a priority on my TBR schedule. Probably not at the moment. So moving on to number 25, or sort of almost halfway there to 50, but there's actually 53 books on the list. Anyway, number 25, Down Below Station by C.J. Cherryh. We forgot to scroll. This is the highlight of the video. People seeing how accurately I do the scroll. That was a pretty good one. That was a pretty good scroll. C.J. Cherryh, I haven't read Down Below Station, but I have read Kesrith, the first book in the Faded Sun trilogy, I believe it's called. And that was very Dune influence. It felt a little derivative. I was a little bored by that. I didn't really connect with it. But people tell me that's maybe not her strongest work. Down Below Station, Sight Teen. There's a few things of hers that I do want to try. So let me know your favorite CJ Cherryh book, and definitely give her a second attempt in the future. Moving on to number 26, we have Ringworld by Larry Niven. I haven't read this one, but this one is pretty high on my TBR because I want to read some more big dumb object sci-fi novels. I do enjoy that subgenre. And I have read, which you might be able to see further down the line, The Mote in God's Eye by Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle, in which we'll do a little double here. We'll double up on number 26 and 30. I thought the first two-thirds were great. I think the Moties are some of the best aliens ever written. The final act of the book fell a little bit flat to me, but still strong enough that I definitely want to pick up Ringworld. At number 27, we have 2001: A Space Odyssey by Arthur C. Clarke. This is probably my second favorite Arthur C. Clarke book, so I think it definitely deserves a space here. I love both the book and the film. I think they complement each other. You learn a little bit in the book that you don't get in the movie, but it's not going to give you all the answers. But definitely check that out if you like that kind of big idea science fiction, because that's definitely what 2001 is. All right, number 28, The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. The Time Machine is the only Wells book that I've read. I do want to read this one. I have watched at least one of the movie adaptations. I can't remember how many there are, but definitely want to check out. I want to read some more early days, pre-1900 science fiction. So I'm looking forward to adding that to the schedule at some point. Number 29, Fahrenheit 451. Talked about this one a little bit. I really liked it. Just a teeny little bit more than The Martian Chronicles, and just a teeny bit less than 1984, but I think a deserved classic within the dystopian subgenre of the classics. It deserves to be one of them, and yeah, I think thematically has remained relevant for decades since it was written. Number 30, The Mote in God's Eye. We talked a little bit about that one, so we'll go to number 31, another one of my all-time favorites, Waystation by Clifford D. Simak. So this is a story about a seemingly ageless recluse that lives on a farm, and yet he also has the interesting job of being the keeper of an intergalactic way station. So we get some kind of, there's a particular word that I'm looking for, pastoral, was that the one? Pastoral vibes. It's a little kind of comfy and cozy, and you kind of get this American farm lifestyle. Reminded me a little bit of Wyndham a bit in terms of tone, but American instead of British in terms of style. And then we had some cool sci-fi elements in there that had an emotional impact on me, and all that adds up to a very great book indeed. Number 32, Star Maker by Olaf Stapledon. So I do own this book, but I haven't read it yet. Stapledon, one of the two, I believe, authors I haven't read anything from on this list, but I do plan to read it soon. Let me know your thoughts on Star Maker, whether you think I'm going to enjoy it. Oh, look how smooth we're getting at the scroll. Just nailed that one. All right, number 33, Dying Inside by Robert Silverberg, your favorite author's favorite author. Silverberg, an author that maybe isn't as read by modern readers as much as perhaps he should be, but a lot of sci-fi authors cite him as a pretty big influence. So he is on the softer end of the sci-fi spectrum, as this is a story about a character that has telepathic powers, but they are dwindling. And so it's this thematic exploration of aging and loss and wasted opportunity and potential, and the character's not that likable, and it's kind of sad, and it's kind of depressing and bleak, but Silverberg's just such a good writer. He gets you to care anyway and to be impacted by it anyway. So highly recommend Dying Inside. Number 34, The City and the Stars. Arthur C. Clarke making, I believe, his third appearance on the list so far. I really enjoyed this one, especially the first 50 pages. The world building, considering that this book is set not hundreds, not thousands, not millions, but billions of years into the future, is just absolutely phenomenal. The level of imagination that Clarke has never ceases to amaze me, especially for a book written in 1956. The story from there is kind of a little bit hit or miss. It's not my favorite Clarke book, but I definitely still liked it, and it's worth reading for the opening alone. Moving on to number 35, we have Dahlgren by Samuel Delany. I haven't read Dahlgren, but I have read Nova, and I thought there was some cool stuff in there, some interesting ideas and themes. We've got a kind of this crew on this adventure, but the whole thing felt very sort of nebulous. I was trying to grasp onto something, and I never kind of found that thing that kind of anchored me down to the story. So not one of my favorites, Nova, but I definitely should try more from Delany, including Dahlgren and maybe Babel or Babel. I'll let you guys argue that in the comments. 17, I'll try that from him next. Number 36, Rendezvous with Rama. And I'm a little surprised that this came below The City and the Stars. This is probably the more famous book. It won all of the big awards the year that it came out. There's a film coming out. It's probably going to be a few years. Denis Villeneuve is working on it, but Dune Messiah is probably going to come next. He's got a few other things in the pipeline. But whenever it does come out, oh man, this movie's going to be good. Maybe like my fourth favorite Clarke book out of the 7 I've read. I'd have to add them all up, fourth or fifth. This book, it's a big dumb object book. So there's this cylinder floating through space. What is it? Where did it come from? Why is it here? I love that kind of mystery. I felt like it got bogged down a little bit at times, and then the ending didn't blow me away as much as other Clarke books have, but it did stay with me. It's a book that I like more and more over time, the more and more I think about it. So definitely worth your time, Rendezvous with Rama. Number 37, Mission of Gravity by Hal Clement. I read this one relatively recently, and this is pretty far towards the hard end of the hard sci-fi spectrum. Hal Clement, I believe, taught maybe physics and chemistry. He was a teacher. He definitely taught a couple of different sciences. I might be forgetting the exact disciplines, but that comes through in the story. We have this world with an insane level of gravity, and humans are trying to rescue this probe from this unique planet, but they're not able to go down on the planet themselves, so they recruit the help of the Mescalinites who live there in order to help them do so. And it's a fun sort of encounter a problem, solve that problem using science type of formula, which I enjoyed, but everything sort of outside the ideas and the science felt a little bit flat. It felt a little bit too basic. I was never emotionally invested in the story. But if you like hard sci-fi, this might be one for you. Number 38, City by Clifford D. Simak. I enjoyed this one not quite as much as Way Station. It's a fix-up novel. It's a collection of stories about the future of humanity, and it involves robots and dogs, and there's some likable characters, and I liked how each of the stories had a very interesting idea to explore or theme to explore. Overall, I'm not sure it built to something that I found as powerful as Way Station, but definitely worth your time. Number 39, Sight Teen by C.J. Cherry. We talked a little bit about her earlier. Let me know if this one is the one that I should try next. Number 40, Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. I absolutely loved Flowers for Algernon. I think the way in which the story is told through journal entries from our main character, Charlie, who is a man with a low IQ but undergoes an experimental surgery to improve his IQ after a similar surgery is successfully performed on a mouse. And we get to see how that affects his life, how it affects his writing as he writes down these journal entries. And it's a real emotional journey on the softer end of the sci-fi spectrum. An excellent book for everybody, but especially for people that might be newer to science fiction. As we move on to number 41, another Heinlein entry. We're going to see a few Heinlein entries here. Let me know which, because sort of the big three, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, Stranger in a Strange Land, Starship Troopers, out of some of the I'm not going to say lesser known ones because they're still fairly well known, but out of these ones that come up over our last few books, let me know what your favorites are, what you think you would put near the top, just under those big three, what should come next. All right, number 42. How good would this have been if it was Hitchhikers? But alas, it is Earth Abides by George R. Stewart. Still a good book. I really enjoyed this one. This is a post-apocalyptic book, which is kind of slow, but it's very thoughtful, and it kind of weaves its way into your brain as you kind of follow these characters that are learning to survive after a certain post-apocalyptic event. And it's simple, but executed extremely well. Number 43, The Door into Summer, another Heinlein book. Let me know where you think that should rank. Number 44, Last and First Men by Olaf Stapledon. Is this as good as Star Maker? Am I doing the right thing? I picked up Star Maker. I'm probably going to read that one first. But let me know if you preferred Last and First Men. Number 45, Ubik by Philip K. Dick. So I mentioned I've read 6 PKD books. This is my number one. I absolutely love Ubik. It has this all the great qualities of PKD's writing in terms of it's being surreal, it's trippy, it's thought-provoking, there's mysteries to unravel, and the book just gets crazier and crazier as it goes on. I love especially the second half, and I think it ends just perfectly. Number 46, Nostralia by Cordwainer Smith. Another book I read fairly recently, and I enjoyed. It's very strange. We have a planet which is pretty much the only planet which has access to something called Stroon, which is an immortality drug. And we have a character that sort of amasses a large amount of money, which causes people to come after him. And it's just this mix of crazy technology and characters, but there's some interesting sort of interpersonal stuff there, and it dives into some psychological things that had an impact on me. I think it's not everything in the story came together perfectly, but I think it's definitely worth reading. Number 47, I'll be honest, I haven't heard of this book before I read this list. The Witches of Carez by James H. Schmitz. Sounds a little bit more fantasy than sci-fi, but I looked it up and it's described as science fiction as well as fantasy. So I don't know what to say about this one. I try to fight the good fight. Sci-fi is the best fi, but when sci-fi and fantasy blend, I'll read a little bit of fantasy. So if you guys recommend it, maybe this will go on the TBR, and I'll read some sci-fantasy. Number 48, Frankenstein, another book where I have the folio edition for that one. I love Frankenstein. I think it is deservedly regarded as a classic, one of the earliest sci-fi novels, and it's still just as great reading it 200 years later. I don't need to explain Frankenstein, do I? I don't know. The prose is great. It took me a little bit to get into the prose. It's about 30 or 40 pages before it kind of clicked for me, just because it is a little bit old-timey. But after that, I love the style. I love the description. I love the themes that the book tackles. It's not overly sci-fi. There's not a ton of science in there, right? And I'm someone that reads a lot of hard sci-fi. But once I adapted to the style, definitely one of the most emotionally affecting books that I've read. Absolutely love Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. And then as we come to our final scroll, let's see. We have number 49, Have Spacesuit Will Travel. Great title. Haven't read it, but I love the title by Heinlein there. Followed by number 50, Time Enough for Love. Another pretty good title. He writes good titles. We'll see how much I like the books, but a couple of great titles there. Number 51, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Oh, speaking of titles, banger, banger, banger. What a final row this is. I like this book. It's not my favorite PKD book, but I think it's a good place to start because it's got sort of a fun story. It introduces you to some of those wacky PKD elements. You may have already watched Blade Runner. It's kind of loosely based on the book. There's some differences there, but because that's such a popular film, and I actually prefer Blade Runner 2049, a good PKD book to pick up, because if you enjoy it, you can then go watch those films and see how they compare. With our second last book on the list, we have number 52, The Gods Themselves by Isaac Asimov. I've read 7 Asimov books, and this is my least favorite. I did not really enjoy this one. Another book that's split into 3 parts. I liked the first one. I felt like Asimov was perhaps trying to show off a little bit too much with part number 2 and win himself a Hugo, and fair play to him, it worked. He did actually win the Hugo for this book. And then part 3, it was decent, but I'd sort of lost interest by then. I would replace this with The End of Eternity. I think The End of Eternity is my favorite Asimov book and probably his most underrated. So if there's any End of Eternity time travel Asimov fans out there, show yourselves in the comments, because I'm a big fan of that one. And then our final book on the list at number 53 is To Your Scattered Bodies Go by Philip Jose Farmer. We need to scroll down a touch just so you can see the... Yeah, don't cut off his name. Give him some love. Philip Jose Farmer. I really enjoyed this one. I haven't read the whole series, but I have read the first book in the Riverworld series, To Your Scattered Bodies Go. And it's interesting. People wake up on this river, and they're trying to figure out, are we in the afterlife? Are we on another planet? There's a good mystery there. There's a good adventure. Interesting groups of people from different time periods come together to make little interesting bands or fellowships, and some interesting ideas. You don't get all the answers in book 1, but I found it a pretty satisfying and exciting adventure in and of itself with the first book in the series. So there you go. That is what the readers of Locus Magazine voted for in 1998. I think they did a pretty good list. As you could tell, I liked a lot of these books. The couple that maybe didn't click for me, I sort of at least understand the popularity, the influence, the importance, why they're regarded as classics. Are there any glaring omissions? Well, I thought about this, and of course it's subjective. There might be some things that are personal favorites of mine that are not going to be on every list, and that's totally understandable. But I did pick out 4 that I was rather surprised not to see. So the first is Hitchhikers. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. How is that not on the list? That's got to be one of the most beloved science fiction books of all time. It wouldn't be in my top 10, but would it be in my top 53? Yeah, I think it would be. The second one, Solaris by Stanislav Lem, one of the most important philosophical, soft science fiction book. Well, he weaves a little bit of hard sci-fi in there, but it's a real thinker, real thought-provoking book. That would be in my top 10. I'm not sure how that one didn't make the list. Let me know if you have any theories on why Solaris might not have made the top 53. After that, and this one hurt me a little bit personally, no Kurt Vonnegut. Kurt Vonnegut, my favorite writer. I know not all of his books are science fiction, but surely something like Slaughterhouse-5 has got to crack the top 53, right? I don't know. Let me know whether you think Vonnegut should have made the list. And then the fourth one that I thought of, and I've only read the first book in this series and wasn't even necessarily the biggest fan of it, but one that I think was very influential, one that I know a lot of people love, and that is The Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. That came out in the 80s, so maybe didn't have as much time to sort of form that classic status as maybe some of the other books that made this list did, but maybe I found a little bit of a larger audience later on through time. Maybe that's not why that's not here, but that's one that I expected might have made the top 53. So there you go, guys. Let's see. We scrolled down. Let's see how well we can scroll up. There you go. Back to the top of the list. There it is. Let me know your thoughts. Hopefully this was helpful. I gave you a little bit of information on some of these. They might have sounded interesting. You can add them to your TBR. And a couple that I haven't read, let me know if I should add them to my TBR. A little give and take. We're a sci-fi community. If you want to be part of the sci-fi community, hit that subscribe button. It's only $4.99. What's that? It's free. Oh well, that sounds like a good deal. But no, it's probably you probably click subscribe. It's free for like a 7-day trial, and then it's like $4.99 a month after. No, it's just completely free. I don't know what to tell you guys. That sounds like a deal that is too good to pass up. Hit that subscribe button. Check out all the links in the description. You know what to do. You know how YouTube works. And I hope you enjoyed the video. If you really did, if you really enjoyed it, check out the perks of becoming a Patreon member, something that you do actually have to pay for. But you can check out the perks such as getting to vote on a book that I read each month. You can join video hangouts to talk more science fiction. If you become one of my robots, androids, or cyborgs, like Nima and New Eden, Half Ogre, Zakoway, and the Top 50 column. And you can find more sci-fi content. Nope, I got it wrong. Over here.